Hare Krishna. Jai Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari Gopi Janavallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yashodanandana Braja Janaranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ओम नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। Hare Krishna. So we are reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 4, chapter entitled Vidura approaches Maitreya, text 23. Kindly repeat after me. Shri Shuka Uvacha Iti Uddhavad Upakarnya Suhridam dussaham vadham Jnanena shamayat kshatta Shokam utpatitam buddha. Shri Shuka Uvacha Iti Uddhavad Upakarnya Suhridam dussaham vadham Jnanena shamayat kshatta Shokam utpatitam buddha. Shri Shuka Uvacha Iti Uddhavad Upakarnya Suhridam dussaham vadham Jnanena shamayat kshatta Shokam utpatitam buddha. Shri Shuka Uvacha Shri Shuka Uvacha Iti Uddhavad Upakarnya Suhridam dussaham vadham Jnanena shamayat kshatta Shokam utpatitam buddha. Shri Shuka Uvacha Iti Uddhavad Upakarnya Suhridam dussaham vadham Jnanena shamayat kshatta Shokam utpatitam buddha. Mataji's. Shri Shuka Uvacha Iti Uddhavad Upakarnya Suhridam dussaham vadham Jnanena shamayat kshatta Shokam utpatitam buddha. Shri Shuka Uvacha Iti Uddhavad Upakarnya Suhridam dussaham vadham Shri Shuka Uvacha इति उद्धवादुपाकर्ण्य सुहृदां दुस्सहं वधूं ज्ञानेन शमयच्छक्ता शोकम् उत्पतितं। Shri Shuka Uvacha. Shri Sukadeva Goswami said, Iti thus, Uddhava from Uddhava, Upakarnya hearing, Suhridam of friends and relatives, Dussaham unbearable, Vadham annihilation, Jnanena by transcendental knowledge, Ashamayat pacified himself, Kshatta Vidura, Shokam bereavement, Utpatitam arisen, Buddha the learned. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Translation. Sri Sukadeva Goswami said, after hearing from Uddhav all about the annihilation of his friends and relatives, the learned Vidura pacified his overwhelming bereavement by dint of his transcendental knowledge. Purport. Vidura was informed that the result of the battle of Kurukshetra was the annihilation of his friends and relatives, as well as the destruction of the Yadu dynasty and also the passing away of the Lord. All these hurled him into bereavement for the time being. But because he was highly advanced in transcendental knowledge, he was quite competent to pacify himself by enlightenment. As it is stated in Bhagavad Gita, due to our long association with bodily relationships, bereavement on account of the annihilation of friends and relatives is not at all astonishing. But one has to learn the art of subduing such bereavement with higher transcendental knowledge. The talks between Uddhava and Vidura on the topic of Krishna began at sunset, and Vidura was now further advanced in knowledge due to his association with Uddhava. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guruho Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahaganana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vansha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschat Deshatarine Jai Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama Hare Rama, Rama Rama Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So first of all, I would like to take permission and blessings from Madhavdas Prabhuji to be able to speak something on the exalted subject of Srimad Bhagavatam and all the assembled Vaishnavas. So in this beautiful section of the Srimad Bhagavatam, we find Vidura meeting Uddhava, and Uddhava is sharing with Vidura the result of the battle of Kurukshetra. And the entire narration may appear to be kind of pessimistic, negative, because there is just the narration of, destruction of the entire Yadu dynasty, and how very many friends and relatives of Vidura, they got killed in the battle of Kurukshetra. The Yadu dynasty is no more. And all the more, even the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Lord Sri Krishna, he has departed from this world. And Uddhava, even in the absence of the Supreme Lord, he is recollecting and remembering the Lord. That shows his deep love for Krishna. And Vidura, when he hears about the departure of his friends and relatives and all the Yadu members, and also of the Supreme Lord, the verse mentions that how Vidura, he was, it says, Prabhupada writes, that all these hurled him into a bereavement for the time being. So Vidura also is very much affected by hearing this news of everyone's departure. And here Vidura, after hearing about the departure of his friends and relatives, still he is able to raise himself from that platform of grief. In the Bhagavad Gita, the 13th chapter, Krishna describes the journey of the living being in this material world. Why the living being, how he comes and how he stays. So he says, Purusha prakriti sthohi bhungte prakriti jan gunan karanam guna sangasya sad asad yoni janmasu. Krishna says that how the living entity, Purusha, having come to this material world, Purusha prakriti sthohi. Bhungte means to enjoy. Prakriti jan guna. The living being comes to this material world and he wants to enjoy, lord it over, Prabhupada writes, lord it over the material world. And with that desire to lord it over, he associates with the modes of material nature. Bhungte prakriti jan gunana. And it is because of this guna sangasya, karanam guna sangasya, because of being affected by the gunas, he acts in certain ways, he habituates himself in certain ways, and he desires certain future for himself. And what is that future? Sometimes in good, sometimes in bad species. Sad asad yoni janmashu. And this cycle keeps on continuing. But Krishna says in the following verses that how it is the duty and responsibility of the living being to come out of this entanglement of repeated birth and death. And how is that possible? He says when a living being understands 6 things. What are those 6 things? Kshetra, Kshetragya, Purusha, Prakriti, Jnanam and Gyayam. So these are detailed subject matters in 13th chapter of the Gita. But essentially he describes there are 20 things that one should know and understand to be able to disentangle himself from the perplexities of this material world. And one of those items of knowledge which Krishna mentions is Janma Mrityu Jara Vyadhi Dukha Dosha Anudarshanam. Anudarshana. Krishna says that one should very distinctively study the evil of birth, old age, disease and death. Prabhupada writes that one should perceive the evil of birth, death, old age and disease. So here we are seeing that how there is so much of discussion about so many people who have been killed. And not just some, some distant people or someone you don't have to deal with. It is about one's own friends and relatives. And it is about the disappearance of the Supreme Lord Himself. In social circles, we find in this world, the subject of death is never discussed. No one wants to discuss about death. Imagine in a marriage ceremony, there is a wedding going on, there is this kirtan going on, and one lady just comes in, hey, hold on, stop all of this kirtan. I have to tell you something very important. And what is that important thing? I want to tell you about the subject of death. So do you think she'll be welcomed? No. So you find in any social gatherings, wherever people assemble, no one wants to touch this topic of death. No one wants to discuss this topic of death. But when we look at the Shastras, when we look at our scriptures, we find this topic of death repeatedly, it is discussed. Repeatedly it comes into picture. In the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada, when he is describing about the departure of the Pandavas to the spiritual abode, to the heavenly abode, it is described that how when the Pandavas, they were leaving, they were accompanied by Draupadi. And as they started ascending the Himalayas, Draupadi couldn't continue. It was very difficult for her to breathe, to keep walking. And at one point of time, Draupadi, she just fell. But the Mahabharata mentions that how the Pandavas, they didn't stop. They continued their journey. And Prabhupada writes there that for that same Draupadi, for whom the entire battle of Kurukshetra was fought, for same Draupadi, now the Pandavas, they didn't wait. They didn't stop to help Draupadi. And Prabhupada writes a very, very important line in his purport, one of the classical Bhaktivedanta statements. Prabhupada writes, ultimately one has to fly one's own plane. Just like in a training academy for pilots, when the pilots are getting trained, they may be getting trained in the same classroom and they may be seeing the different aspects of how there are different controls in the aircraft and how one has to maneuver and one has to control the aircraft and everything. So while everyone is on ground, while everyone is in the classroom, everyone learns together. But once the session is over, once the training is over, once they take their own helmets and march towards their aircraft, it is completely their responsibility and it is completely that single person who is flying that plane to ensure that the plane goes on properly. In the middle of the flight, you can't just, get confused and, start, hey, other, the other plane, what was this red button for? No. So Prabhupada writes this very important line that ultimately one has to fly one's own plane. And therefore, even in our own lives, always we may not be surrounded by people who will help us come out of these difficult situations. Yes, when we are in the association of devotees, it is our responsibility to train ourselves up. But then, to go through the highs and lows of the material world, we cannot just be dependent always on others. And we find the beautiful example of Vidura here, that how Vidura was able to raise himself from that imminent grief. Now that grief is really intense. I mean, each of us can remember those times when we went through situation where some near and dear one, he or she had left their bodies, and it's intense. It's intense. It's not theoretical. All of us have experienced it. And all that we have seen people in this world is lamenting. All that we have seen people is crying. But Bhagavatam mentions that how by dint of his transcendental knowledge, Vidura was able to deal with his bereavement, deal with his grief, deal with his sadness. It says, Jnanena shamayat. He pacified himself with transcendental knowledge. And we find similar instances in many other places in the scriptures. We find the example of Bhishma Dev. When Yudhishthir Maharaj, he was very much afflicted, and he was holding himself responsible for so many of these people in his own family being killed. Yudhishthir Maharaj was deeply afflicted with grief, and that is when Krishna takes him to Bhishma Dev. And Bhishma Dev helps him understand, helps him rise above that imminent grief that Yudhishthira Maharaj was going through. And Bhishma Parva is one of the long sections of the Mahabharata, wherein Yudhishthira Maharaj is trained by Bhishma Dev in different understandings in the duties and responsibilities as a king, and so many other topics. We see the example of Chitraketu Maharaj. He wanted a son, but he didn't have a son. He had so many wives, but no son. And then finally, after a lot of some blessings and all, he finally has a son. And then the son is poisoned by some of his wives. And the son dies. And Chitraketu Maharaj is like completely, that dream that he had been having for years and years together, he had actually fulfilled that dream. Imagine if you were dreaming about purchasing a car. For years together, you're like, getting the money, earning a lot of money, and then, you finally book your dream car, and you drive the car home. And then there is a JCB, as you're parking your car, there is a JCB that is going by, carrying some stones, and this driver, he just loses control, and some of those big, huge stones, they fall in that brand new car. What will be the reaction? Hi, hey. So similarly, Chitraketu Maharaj, he was completely bewildered what to do in such a case. And that is when Narad Muni and Angita Muni, they come, and by their blessings, that dead son rises up again. And Chitraketu Maharaj is once again happy, and he is like loving my son, and the son says, whose son, whose father? I have had many fathers. Which father are you referring to? And then the son trains him, gives him spiritual knowledge. And that is when Chitraketu Maharaj, he understands the dynamics of this material world, and he is able to disentangle himself. Even in the 7th canto, we find the example of Hiranyakashipu. When Hiranyaksha is killed, Prabhupada writes, all the wives and children of Hiranyaksha, they were lamenting and crying and everything. And Prabhupada writes that because Hiranyakashipu was a very intelligent politician, he knew how to handle the situation, where to speak what. And Hiranyakashipu, although he had demoniac mentality, but Hiranyakashipu is speaking about transcendental knowledge, spiritual knowledge, science of the soul, and he pacifies all the lamenting wives of Hiranyaksha and all of his cousins and nephews, like that. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, we have the example of Srivas Thakur and his son. the son of Srivas Thakur, he leaves his body while kirtan is going on. And then Srivas Thakur goes and says, ki, don't cry very loudly. I mean, what kind of a suggestion is that? If someone has passed away in someone's house, and you go to that house and you mention to the relatives that, it's okay, don't cry so loudly. Cry in a low voice. That doesn't make sense. But then Lord Chaitanya comes to know, and he tells the child, oh child, get up. And lo and behold, the child gets up. And he surrenders to Lord Chaitanya, and how Lord Chaitanya bestows him with love of Godhead. So in all of these instances, we find whether it is the instance of Yudhishthir Maharaj, whether it is the instance of Chitraketu Maharaj, or Hiranyaksh, the wives of Hiranyaksh, none of these actually wanted to hear spiritual knowledge. They just happened to hear. That was circumstantial hearing. But then there is the other kind of hearing wherein a conscious effort is made to train oneself in spiritual understanding. In the Katha Upanishad, there is a beautiful story of a small boy, Nachiketa. So this small boy, Nachiketa, his father was a sage. The name of the sage was Vajashrava. So Vajashrava very much wanted to get spiritual credits. So one time Vajashrava, he is performing a sacrifice. And as a part of the sacrifice, Vajashrava is donating many cows to the Brahmanas. But then these cows, because he was kind of a stingy sage or didn't want to give, he ends up donating old and unproductive cows. Now Nachiketa is a small boy. He is seeing that my father is, the kind of dakshina that he is giving to the Brahmanas is very low quality. He is giving old and unproductive cows. So Nachiketa is kind of confused. Ki, you are performing a sacrifice, you are expecting spiritual credits and blessings out of this sacrifice. So the dakshina that you should be giving should be nice. So Nachiketa is confused, and he asks his father that, Father, you are giving these old and unproductive cows to the Brahmanas. Whom will you give me to? I am also your property. Maybe I am also not so productive. Where will you hand me over to? So Vajashrava, he takes it as a taunt from his son. That my son is speaking this way, and he gets angry. And in anger, he tells his son Nachiketa that I'll give you to Yamraj. And this Nachiketa is like terrified. But then the Katha Upanishad mentions that how Nachiketa takes the advice of his father very seriously, and he actually goes to the abode of Yamraj. He goes to Yamalok. He reaches Yamalok, but Yamraj is not there. So for 3 days, Nachiketa, without food and water, he waits for Yamraj. And after 3 days, when Yamraj arrives, he is very much impressed with the patience and sense control of Nachiketa. And Yamraj gives Nachiketa 3 boons. Ask me 3 things that you want. So first thing that Nachiketa asks from Yamraj is, please free my father from anger. And when I return home, please have him welcome me without resentment, without anger. So that is the first thing. So Yamaraj grants his boon. Okay, I bless you that your father will be free from anger and he'll welcome you nicely. The second thing Nachiketa asks for is, I know you know a secret of a particular sacrifice, a particular yajna, by which one can actually get heavenly pleasures. So Yamaraj, he tells the secret of that particular sacrifice. Not only that, he names that sacrifice after Nachiketa, that is known as Nachiketa Agni, performing which one is able to achieve heavenly bliss. Don't ask me, I don't know that secret. The third boon that Nachiketa asks from Yamaraj, that tell me about death. So Yamaraj is taken aback. The small child wants to learn about death. So Yamaraj, he tries to distract him that, I'll give you so much of wealth, I'll give you so much of a position, power and everything. But Nachiketa is focused. No. Tell me about death. What is the nature of death and what happens after death? And pleased with the innocent inquiries of Nachiketa, Yamaraj, he instructs Nachiketa in the science of the soul and how one should perform his activities in this world so that ultimately one is able to relieve himself from the entanglement of this material world. And that is when Nachiketa, he comes back to the earthly realm and he's fully self-realized and performs devotional service and perfects his life, goes back. This is an example of how one consciously inquires and trains himself in the process of bhakti. So whether it is circumstantial receiving of knowledge, we may not have wanted to come to the Srimad Bhagavatam class and we just came for darshan and we happened to just sit and we happened to listen. Many times it happens. We don't plan to learn spirituality, but then circumstantially we end up learning so many things. So whether it is by circumstance or whether it's by conscious endeavor, this learning of spiritual principles, this learning of the science of the soul is something that is very important and helpful for us for two things. To navigate through the waves of this material world, this Bhavasagar, because when we stay in this material world, the waves of this world take us up and down. And not just navigate through life, but also near the shore of complete realization of Krishna consciousness. So in the time that we have, we'll be discussing how can we use this tool of hearing, this tool of training to navigate through this world and to ensure that we get closer to full realizations of Krishna consciousness. And both of these things are possible by the grace of the Lord. So this grace defines 5 steps that if we can follow, it will be very helpful for us. The very first thing is, by deliberate endeavor, one should gain spiritual wisdom. And this is where the entire story starts. The entire story of understanding about this material world, understanding the process of perfecting one's life in this material world starts by hearing. And they say that just like a sailor needs a map or a compass to sail through the ocean, or a GPS in today's day and age, without an assistance, without an external equipment, it is very difficult to just see and navigate. Sometimes people have this approach that, I'll see when it comes. I'll somehow or the other deal with every situation and circumstances. But that doesn't happen. And therefore, just like a sailor needs some tool. So similarly, as sadhakas, the tool is that spiritual wisdom that we need to have. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada, to give this tool to the entire world, Srila Prabhupada established a system of regular hearing and studying so that people in this world can get that spiritual wisdom and benefit from that spiritual wisdom. Bhagavatam mentions Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. Regularly hearing Srimad Bhagavatam. Regularly spending some time to understand and imbibe the aspects, the teachings of the Shastras. In Srimad Bhagavatam, in one of the purports, Srila Prabhupada gives the example of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu goes to Varanasi, he is misunderstood to be a sentimental person, just singing kirtan and just dancing and everything. And Prakashananda Saraswati, He calls Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and he wants to give him knowledge. But then, after Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu hears very patiently from Prakashanand Saraswati, and then Prakashanand Saraswati asks him to speak. And when Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu speaks to Prakashanand Saraswati, just hearing from Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, his heart is purified. And that famous scholar of entire Varanasi, who was a known name in the town of Varanasi, his heart is changed by hearing. And therefore, in each of our lives, for each one of us, somewhere down the line, we should also reflect and think, what is my conscious effort? What am I endeavoring? Am I just dependent on circumstances that somehow or the other I'll learn things and somehow or the other I'll get in association? Or am I actually making some conscious endeavor? Srila Prabhupada wrote these Bhaktivedanta purports at the dead of night. And we know all of these things that, yes, Prabhupada wrote so many things and we should be reading on a regular basis. But are we? Are we? The principle remains the same whether we are in the initial stages of bhakti or whether we are in the exalted stages of bhakti. And therefore, this principle of gaining spiritual wisdom is where the entire story begins. The second thing is, it's not just only about learning things, but also refining our vision, how we see the events, circumstances in our life, how we see this world, how we see the situations in this world, how we respond to the different situations that we encounter in this world through spiritual vision, through Shastra Chakshu. In Rishikesh, there is a place, Vasishta Gufa, on the banks of Ganges, where Vasishta Muni, he performed his tapasya. And one time I had been to this place, and on the banks of Ganges, I saw a very beautiful sight. I'll take 2 minutes to describe what this sight was. There was this cable bridge across the Ganga, hanging bridge. And on top of that cable bridge, something interesting was happening. Guess what? A pre-marriage shoot was happening. I hope everyone knows what a pre-marriage shoot is. So in the middle of the bridge, there's the bride and the groom, and there are camera people at few places, and there is this pre-wedding shoot happening. And right beneath the bridge, on the banks of Gangaji, there is a cremation that is happening. The smoke of the funeral pyre is rising. And the whole situation was so, that immediately I remembered a famous line from one of the Hindi poets. This Hindi poet, Ram Avatar Tyagi, he says, and I could relate that this person who has just died, he is speaking to the groom. Okay? The person who has died, he is speaking to the groom and he's saying, जिन आंखों की गहराई में तुम डूब रहे, मैं उबर चुका. पथ वही अंतर इतना तुम गुजर रहे, मैं गुजर चुका. So we find in this world, people are so much swayed by the glitter and glamour of this world. And they are unable to perceive the movement of the Kala Chakra, how the world is moving. Bereft of Shastra Chakshu, bereft of spiritual vision, they are unable to see how times are changing. Just like when a sailor sees that the weather in the sky is changing, the sailor adjusts his sails. So similarly, we see that how just in a matter of, even in our own lifetimes, we have seen that in a matter of 20, 30 years, how the world is changing so fast. India used to be primarily an agricultural driven country, where people used to go out into the fields and work hard and earn out of their physical hard work. And then times changed and people went from the fields into nice AC, cubicles, working from 9 to 9, working hard. And then last 5 years, everyone went from their office, in the cubicles in their office, to their inside their homes, work from home. Just log in on time and sit in the comfort of your home and work. Times have changed. Not just that, recently we are seeing how times are changing all the more. People don't want to even work. They just want to be on their mobiles. They just want to do something, whether it is like, stock trading or some AI thing. You just be busy with your phone and money keeps coming in your bank account. Correct? Correct? You just, do something and you create some, marketing and everything. How the world is changing so rapidly. In such a situation, if we are unable to perceive this Kala Chakra, how we need to also adjust our sails. And we find that how when Arjuna, he was bereft of this spiritual vision on the battle of Kurukshetra, he was unable to understand what his duty was. He was just unable to understand what is he supposed to do, how is he supposed to act, what his responsibility is. And in a matter of just an hour or so, when he gets that spiritual vision from Krishna in the form of the knowledge of the Gita, Arjuna is able to see the world in a different light. Arjuna is able to understand his duty and responsibility. And Arjuna is actually able to act in a much better manner. So therefore, the story begins at gaining spiritual wisdom. The second is applying that spiritual wisdom to see the world through the eyes of the scriptures. And when we have this wealth of spiritual wisdom, one is actually able to know how do I deal with different situations, how do I deal with different people, where do I need to tolerate, where do I need to react, where do I need to work, where do I need to just stay calm. And the third thing which follows, which automatically follows when one has spiritual wisdom and one is refining one's vision or applying that spiritual wisdom to see this world, one actually is able to advance in this world step by step. One actually finds himself growing in Krishna consciousness. Again, in the Bhagavad Gita, 6th chapter, Krishna says that Shanay Shanay Uparamed Buddhaya Dhriti Grihitaya Atma Samstham Manah Kritva Na Kinchid Api Chintayet. Slowly and gradually, one should apply spiritual knowledge to purify one's mind and the senses. When one has spiritual knowledge, one is able to perceive the world in a different light. Then one has to apply all of that knowledge to slowly and gradually purify one's mind and the senses. Because purification of the mind, purification of the desires is not an overnight process. It is said that you cannot train a wild horse in a day. You cannot force a plant to grow overnight. And similarly, you can't expect your mind and senses to be completely controlled and bereft of the desire for sense gratification in a day. And therefore, there is work to be done. There is work to be done in terms of acquiring spiritual wisdom. There is work to be done in terms of seeing the world, understanding the events, situations, people of this world through spiritual wisdom, and applying that wisdom to purify oneself. And when we do so, we actually raise ourselves. Srila Prabhupada, he defines pratyahara in the purport to this verse. He defines pratyahara that by proper conviction and intelligence, one should gradually cease sense activities. This is called pratyahara. Perfecting one's knowledge is not just going to be possible by studying Shastra. Perfecting our lives is going to be possible when we apply what we have learned from the Shastras, and slowly and gradually we convince our mind and our senses and repeatedly pull back from the desires of sense gratification. It is a process. It needs work. We can't just assume that just because we are in the association of devotees, we are seated in a Bhagavatam class, or we are having nice prasadam, automatically I'll be purified. No. Prabhupada writes, what is pratyahara? By spiritual wisdom, one has to convince himself enough is enough. Not now. Ho gaya. I've had enough. And this world gives us many such occasions wherein we'll need to convince our mind time and again. Nahi. My duty is not to enjoy, my duty is to serve. So that is how we advance from step by step. The next thing comes is, we are not here to be just selfish. We also need to care for others. Because when we receive spiritual knowledge, we understand the effectiveness of spiritual vision, Shastra Chakshu. We are actually able to deal and raise ourselves from the platform of grief. We are able to understand dhiras tatrana muhyati. There is a difference between how a Krishna conscious person, he reacts to situations of grief and the world outside. People are so much in illusion, they have no clue what has just happened. When a person leaves his body, as if like when you're standing on the road and you see a car coming, the car comes to a halt, the driver of the car comes out of the car, he gets out of one car, he gets into another car and he drives that car. How many people start crying seeing that? Matlab, ek gaadi aayi, the driver came out, the driver got into another car and went off. How many people cry seeing this? Hardly anyone. Because they understand what has just taken place. But when the same thing happens in terms of the spiritual soul, the spirit coming out of one body and getting into another body, the knowledge is not there. The understanding is not there. The vision is not there. And that is why we have seen people only cry, lament, grieve. I don't want to create that scene in a temple hall. But then we have experienced, we have seen. And therefore, when we benefit from spiritual wisdom, it is our responsibility to also care for others. And we see that how this aspect of caring was so perfectly demonstrated by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada was very well situated. He had that wisdom of the Shastras. He had that Shastra Chakshu. What to talk of being advanced? Pratyahara, pulled away from sense gratification. But out of this attitude to care for the entire world, Srila Prabhupada wrote down these Bhaktivedanta purports, shared this spiritual wisdom in a format which is accessible and available for people all over the world. And that is when we see today change happening all over the world. When people actually receive this spiritual knowledge and they apply it in their lives, they're able to perceive a change in themselves. So that is about caring for others. And then as we spend our time, definitely a day will come. A day will come in the life of each and every one of us when what we have learned, what vision we have developed will be tested. Nothing is theoretical. We are dealing with the reality here. A day will come in each of our lives when whatever we have acquired in terms of our spiritual understanding, spiritual realizations, that will be tested. And at that point of time, if the practice is perfect, that will lead to perfection. And therefore, in that final moment, we'll be grateful. We'll express gratitude to Krishna for giving us all of this knowledge, for giving us all of this association, for giving us all of the service opportunities, for giving us the strength to render these services, and for giving us that spiritual realizations, that sense of dependence on Krishna. And that is the whole purpose of the Shastras. That is the whole purpose of this entire Krishna consciousness movement, that somehow or the other we develop, we gain that spiritual wisdom, and by practicing, we convert that spiritual wisdom into deep-seated realizations. And when that time of test will come, we'll be able to express our gratitude to the Supreme Lord. Sripad Ramanujacharya, in the final moments of his presence on this earth, he called all of his disciples. And this is something I had heard way back in 2005 in our South India Yatra by Solinus Radhanath Swami Maharaj. And this one statement really just went deep and just remained with me. So Sripad Ramanujacharya, in the final days of his life, he called all of his disciples, and one of the instructions that he gave to his disciples was, do not be concerned with the phenomena of the material world going on around you. Now, the phenomena of the material world could be the glitter and glamour of the material world, or the grief and sadness of the material world, or the changing reality of the material world. Do not be concerned with the phenomena of the material world going on around you. Just be concerned about doing your service for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for the pleasure of Guru and Krishna. And when we also endeavor in a similar manner, by not being swayed away by the glitter and glamour, by gaining spiritual wisdom, by refining our vision, by advancing step by step, caring for others, and finally expressing our gratitude. By this grace, we'll be able to perfect our life. Just like we find the beautiful example of Vidura. Vidura is also able to uplift himself from the immediate grief of hearing about the annihilation of the entire Yadu dynasty, the passing away of his friends and relatives, and also about the disappearance of the Supreme Lord. So summarizing what we discussed today, our journey in this Bhavasagar is that we need to adjust our sails. We just can't keep continuing the way we are. Then we discussed the two types of hearing, circumstantial hearing and conscious hearing. Both are okay, but then there has to be a emphasis on conscious hearing, so that we are able to navigate and near the shore of full realizations in Krishna consciousness. And how will we be able to do so? By grace, by gaining spiritual wisdom, by refining our vision with which we see this world, see the situations in this world, advancing step by step, by purifying our mind and senses, caring for others, giving that spiritual wisdom to others, and finally expressing gratitude to Krishna for all that we have received. So thank you all very much for being here this morning. Granth-raj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. May I also request Madhav Das Prabhuji, if you would like to speak something. Maybe you can just pass on the wireless mic to Prabhuji. Prabhuji, the mic is just here.
Hare Krishna. Thank you for asking. I remember you were saying that one who is in knowledge doesn't lament. Krishna says this also when someone has passed. But I don't know the source where I heard it, but I heard that when Maharaj Yudhisthira was lamenting the loss of his relatives, that he was advised that, they are all existing already. They're still continuing to exist. Just like Krishna tells Arjuna, never was there a time I did not exist, nor you, nor all these kings.
Yeah.
But Maharaj Yudhisthira's reply was, yes, I understand. But I was accustomed to relate to him in this way.
Very true. Yeah.
Does anyone know that passage? Anyway, the point is valid, whether or not it was Yudhisthira or just some poetic expression. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. Granth Raj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai, Srila Prabhupada ki jai.